welcome to a very special, spooktacular episode of Heavy Metal 101. A special and spooktacular episode indeed. You know, following last year's Halloween episode, on which we went pretty much completely off the reservation in creating a radio play-esque retelling of the classic 80s King Diamond concept album narratives, I wanted to do something entirely different this time around. And so, in that spirit, pun intended, I have brought along a whole different co-host. Beloved Heavy Metal 101 listeners, John is off somewhere trick-or-treating and perhaps throwing eggs at his neighbors' houses today, so please join me in welcoming my spooktacular and special guest, Patrick, from the abso-frickin-lutely wonderful Rewind of the Living Dead podcast. Patrick, welcome to the show!
Eric, thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor to be on.
Oh my gosh, you know, it is a huge honor for me. I assume you know this by now because I've been bugging you guys with emails pretty regularly. I'm a big fan of the show. I've actually been listening to it, I think, for a couple of years now at this point. And it's my personal go-to horror movie podcast. You know, I listen to a few, but yours is the only one I listen to sort of weekly and check out the new episodes as soon as they're released. I'm assuming that many of our metalhead listeners on this show are also, just like me, just huge horror fans. So, Mike, could you tell the listeners just a little bit about what you guys do over there?
Sure. First, seek help for being such a big fan of ours. And secondly, thank you so much for listening. Rewind of the Living Dead podcast is a podcast conceived by the great Damon Martin, a mixed martial arts journalist and sports journalist. And he and I together do a deep dive on one horror movie every single week. Don't ask me how we do that.
I have no idea how you guys do that. It amazes me to no end.
I have two small children. I know you have children. That makes for a busy life and my regular profession and all of that good stuff. Damon Martin might work 80 hours a week. And I don't know how we manage to get you guys a podcast every single week, but we do. We go deep. We talk about one movie every week. We don't kind of divert. We have done horror movie news and stuff in the past, but really it's about talking about one movie and getting deep down into it.
Yeah, and again, I can't emphasize enough what a great job I think you guys do of it. It's just from a educational and entertainment standpoint, just as good as it gets. I love what you guys do, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Now, meanwhile, Patrick, I know that you, like me, have a lifelong love affair with our beloved heavy metal. So could you tell us a bit about your personal relationship with heavy metal?
Well, truth be told, it starts with MTV. And I grew up, I was a little kid of the 80s and early 90s, and Headbangers Ball was everything. I mean, quite literally everything to me. And I grew up this weird time where there was this convergence of heavy metal, classic rock, glam metal, and grunge all converging on Headbangers Ball. So you got this real breadth of like a very huge spectrum of rock and roll in one place, which was Headbangers Ball. And by the way, just for bragging rights, the only music video I ever got on MTV as a director was on Headbangers Ball.
Oh my gosh, you deserve serious bragging rights for that. That's amazing. Do you mind sharing what the video was?
Of course, it was for the band Oceano, and the video was District of Misery, so the metalcore band out of Chicago.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'm going to definitely immediately go and check that out as soon as we're done recording. That's awesome, though. God. Yeah, Headbangers Ball is truly an iconic heavy metal institution, and I just remember every Saturday night just watching that way too late and worshiping at the altar of all kinds of crazy, ranging from glam metal to doom metal to death metal to even, like you said, grunge. I remember seeing Nirvana on Headbangers Ball back in the day.
What?
So for today's spooktacular bonus episode of Heavy Metal 101, celebrating the very best time of year, October, and the ooky Halloween season that surrounds it, I wanted to look not only at heavy metal the music, but actually at a heavy metal horror film and at the heavy metal soundtrack that accompanies it. We're going to discuss said movie and said soundtrack momentarily, but before we do so, I wanted to step back and consider the subgenre that is the heavy metal horror film.
Yeah, baby!
Patrick, can you and I both agree that heavy metal and horror go together like the proverbial peanut butter and chocolate?
Oh, absolutely. Peanut butter and chocolate couldn't be a better combo and a better metaphor for the mixture of these two genres. I love that.
I feel that strongly and deeply in my soul. Absolutely. So the history of the intersection of these genres goes all the way back to the very beginning. A little band named Black Sabbath was named after the 1963 Mario Bava horror anthology of the same name, starring Boris Karloff.
Do you believe in ghosts?
This is the night when fear and horror walk hand in hand.
This is Black Sabbath.
Patrick, Black fucking Sabbath! Now that's a pretty deep connection, right?
It's the best. It's my favorite little anecdote to tell people who don't know much about heavy metal. It's like, no, literally the first heavy metal band was like, why don't we make a scary band? And because of that poster sitting outside their theater there in town, I love that bit of history.
Now, have you seen the film Black Sabbath?
I have not. I wish and could say that I have seen it. Have you seen it?
I have. I watched it many years ago, just making an effort to sort of catalog earlier pre-modern horror films, and it's pretty charming. It's a little cheesy. It's very pre-Night of the Living Dead. I don't think too many people are going to find it particularly terrifying in this day and age, but it's still both an important part of horror history, and most particularly, obviously now, an important part of heavy metal history. And plus, Mario Bava is like the shit, and he would eventually give us arguably the first slasher film, A Bay of Blood from 1971. Now, I know you've talked about giallos quite a bit on Rewind of the Living Dead. I can't remember, are you a giallo fan?
I do like giallo. I'm not a giallo historian by any stretch. I've got a great buddy who is, but I do like giallo for its style, the cinematography, how they're really not truly horror films, or they don't fancy themselves horror films. They're like detective films. They're sexy films, however they want to play it. And then horror just happens to be part of it all. It's like, yeah, let's go for the blood, the guts, and the gore on top of all the other crazy things we're doing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're fascinating. They don't fit neatly into the horror category, as you said, but they're definitely, they're profoundly influential on horror. As we said, giallo is kind of where the roots of the slasher are. I think I've watched most of the most essential giallos. I'm kind of lukewarm overall. They can be, the bad dubbing tends to rub me the wrong way. But for the uninitiated, I'll just say that giallo is an Italian horror/thriller hybrid, kind of what Patrick was saying. It developed in the mid-1960s. Aside from Bava, some of the best-known practitioners include Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento, who are names that I think most horror fans will be familiar with, and probably most metal fans too. The 2024 Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats album, Nel Ora Blue, is basically an audio giallo, which is a fascinating experiment in music and sort of audio film. It's definitely a loving tribute to that genre. Oh, and also, speaking of Lucio Fulci, the Italian death metal band named Fulci just released Duckface Killings, which is based on a Fulci film that you guys reviewed on Rewind of the Living Dead, The New York Ripper. That was a fun episode. I don't recall you guys being huge fans of the film.
Oh, you're kidding? I'm a huge fan of New York Ripper, but for all the wrong reasons. It's just one of those films that is absolutely ridiculous. Certainly not one of his best films, but highly entertaining to watch, especially if you're, perhaps, you're touched by certain chemical libations or other things. You can really enjoy yourself watching New York Ripper. It's just not a good movie.
The killer literally does a Donald Duck style spooky voice, right?
Call Fulci the original M. Night Shyamalan, because what a swing he took deciding that his killer would talk like Donald Duck.
Now, on the other hand, have you had a chance to check out either the Uncle Acid or the Fulci albums yet?
I did check out Fulci, very reminiscent of the Chris Barnes death metal style, but I loved all of the giallo kind of laced into it. That's just fun. I like metal concept albums. I don't think you're a metalhead if you don't love concept albums anyway. But I'm not the biggest death metal guy, but I could respect what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I really do like a lot of death metal, but I just agree in general, just lacing in like little elements from the film score and little like sound pieces and stuff. Uncle Acid do the same thing, although there's no extant film. But yeah, this whole the concept metal thing, I think it just sort of takes the whole thing to the next level. It's just fun, especially when it's horror concepts. I mean, how cool is that?
Metal is theatrical. It really is. The best of it tells stories. The best of it has sort of maybe cold opens and then great first acts and then, this wild middle part of the film or the song. And then it brings you to this insane finale. Like it's such a theatrical genre.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things about the music and the live concert experience is how it transports you, how it's like sort of an evil Broadway musical or an evil opera in many respects. And it's fucking awesome. It's great. All that having been said, I guess we're getting a little off track here. We should collect ourselves and think a little bit more about this idea of how something can be a heavy metal horror movie. Like what makes a movie a quote unquote heavy metal horror movie? I think that there's kind of two different ways. You can correct me if you feel otherwise. But there's the type of movie where the music and or musicians are directly integrated into the film. I think of old-timey classics like Rocktober Blood from 1984, The Immortal Trick or Treat from 1986, Black Roses from 1988. These are all good examples of that. Or there's just a lot of, because of that peanut butter and chocolate thing, a lot of heavy metal soundtracks that just accompany the action of horror films. So a movie like Shocker, Wes Craven's Shocker from 1989, Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2003, Rob Zombie's Halloween, of course, from 2007, etc. Does this seem like a reasonable understanding of heavy metal and horror movies come together?
I think so. And I think there's also a third way to get into heavy metal horror movies, and that is just the characters. Sometimes you have a movie like Return of the Living Dead. They're punks, okay, but it's still heavy music. There's just movies where there's people in leather-clad jackets with spikes on them and weird-colored hair, and they seem to be the most down people to fight off the zombies or fight the possession or fight they've sort of been training for this their whole life, right? Like punks and metalheads and heshers, they've been dreaming of this moment and they happen to be dropped into this horror film and they're gung-ho to go after whatever is happening in this film. They are usually not someone who's going to retreat from the horror. They might face it head on, even if it scares the shit out of them. They're still going to be like, okay, yeah, but I've been waiting for this my whole life, so let's fucking do it.
Hell yeah. It's kind of like the Eddie from Stranger Things phenomenon, right?
Very much so.
Great point. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there's actually a really fun micro-genre of bands or songs that are explicitly dedicated to heavy metal musicians writing music about horror movies. We already mentioned Fulci, named after the director. Ice Nine Kills and Mortician are two other bands that instantly come to my mind who are particularly invested in this. Now, are you a fan of either of those bands?
So Ice Nine Kills is a little Panic at the Disco for me. It's not... And that's not to insult them. If you like that kind of music, that's fine. By the way, Damon Martin, my co-host, loves Ice Nine Kills. And he would probably be absolutely mortified and argue with me for an hour on end about how they are so not Panic at the Disco. But they're just a little more poppy, in my opinion. That said, I love their concept, which is like, we are a horror heavy metal band. Everything we do is dedicated to horror, and I think it makes for a great live show. Clearly makes for amazing fan engagement. I think they have some of the most dedicated fans I've ever seen for late stage heavy metal. So I really respect what they do. It's just not musically, it's not my thing. With regards to Mortician, it's a little closer to what I'm into. Again, I'm not a huge death metal guy, but Mortician reminded me of something, and that was, there used to be these things called record stores. Some of your listeners probably have heard of these. When I used to go to record stores in the late 90s, early 2000s, going to the death metal section where Mortician existed was not unlike going to your favorite video store and going to the horror section. You would thumb through those album covers, and they were disgusting and vile, and they had blood and guts and gore and the most offensive possible covers. It was like almost the goal of death metal, and Mortician was right up there with Cannibal Corpse and many others. They wanted to shock you on the album cover. And that is a lost art, right? Because we typically don't go to record stores anymore. But Mortician reminded me of those days, and I got a little wistful. I was like, the good old days when I used to thumb through those absolutely bile and gore-filled covers and go, yummy, whatever this is, I want to listen to it.
So many bowels spilling out and full, beautiful colors. Yeah. It's good stuff. It's very good stuff. And as someone with at least one tiny toe, myself, dipped into the fetid extreme horror subgenre, I would be remiss in my standings as a total sociopath if I didn't mention the legendary, now defunct Necrophagia, and particularly the connection of their singer, Killjoy, rest in peace, to quite possibly the most notorious extreme horror film of all time, August Underground's Mortem. Now, out of curiosity, have you seen any of the August Underground movies?
I haven't. The trailers are really intriguing. I know you gotta kind of go digging for those. They're not exactly available anywhere, and I don't particularly play in those parts of the internet where you can find them. But yeah, I'm intrigued by those extreme horror films and almost like, I would say, snuff films. Like I just saw that on Shudder, they have Faces of Death now.
I know, I saw that too. I'm like, so I don't know if this violates all my cred as a horror fan and as a human being. I have very intentionally never watched Faces of Death for the reason that I go very, very hard with horror, but real stuff is very clearly where I draw the line, particularly real animal stuff. And I know that most of Faces of Death is in fact totally fake, but the animal stuff I understand is real. So I'm like very much on the fence, like, do I finally just sit down and watch? I mean, those animals are long ass dead at this point. I've seen Cannibal Holocaust, so why am I not watching Faces of Death just to do it? But yeah, so I've never seen it. Have you watched Faces of Death?
I have. I've watched Faces of Death. I haven't watched it recently, but there was certainly that time in my life where I was after things like that. I would have watched August Underground if I had found it at the right time. But watching those trailers really reminded me of an extreme horror film I've seen recently that perhaps you've seen called Atroz from Mexico.
I sure have.
It's vile. I don't, and I'm going to tell you right now, certain films, and maybe August Underground would have fallen under this, you tell me, but I go, this is just to disgust me. It has no value. And some would argue, well, sometimes that's a thing. That's its own art form. I don't enjoy movies like Atroz. I don't like sitting down for movies like that. If you can somehow blend the extremism and the realism with a great story, you always have me. A great story will trump almost anything. But I haven't seen those the August Underground movies. Have you?
So I watched the original August Underground, like I have to say, not that long ago. Some of the other horror podcasts I listen to with some regularity are extreme horror podcasts, and so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it, because I'd kind of gotten the sense that the original August Underground, while insanely intense, was like, I don't want to say at all entry level, but as extreme, super extreme horror goes, like doable. Like I wasn't going to like scar my brain indefinitely. I have been washing my eyes out with soap daily pretty much ever since I watched it. What softened the blow a little bit is I after watching it, I actually became Facebook friends with the star and director, Fred Vogel. And he's like the most lovely human being, total sweetheart, married, has animals, like just a nice guy. And that like, it's fiction, right? At the end of the day, as intense and overwhelming as those images can be, when it's fiction, you can just say like, oh, okay, I did it. It's like, going on a super scary roller coaster or whatever. That having been said, I haven't yet, at least, been able to bring myself to watch either of the sequels. And this is despite the fact that Mortem actually started off life as a commission for a Necrophagia music video, which I think is pretty neat.
That is neat. I love the little connecting of the worlds there. That's great.
Yeah, so it's super cool. It's just, I don't know. I really like dabbling my toe in extreme horror, but I'm not, it's not where I live. I don't frequent those parts of the internet either. So, I try and take it real slow with that stuff.
And I love that you told me that it's Fred Vogel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that Fred Vogel is a nice guy, is a family man, because that is the truth with every horror director and storyteller that I've ever met. They are sweet human beings. And you go, no, I'm sorry, you made that thing that made me vomit. They're like, yes, but like I'm an animal lover, and like like truth be told, they tend to be nice people. They just want to examine the darkest parts of our psyche. They're willing to go down that road. Instead of suppressing it, they find this medium for it. And I'm a director myself. I have a short film coming up that crosses some people's taboos where they looked at it and went, you can't do that. And I go, not only am I doing it, I'm including my family in it. Like, we're going to do this together. You know what I mean? With it, like, this is just
awesome.
Give us the room to express ourselves. You certainly don't have to watch.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, that's the thing. I find some of the most well-adjusted people are the people who are confronting and creating in these mediums on a regular basis, because it's venting, like you said. It's just getting out a lot of the things that we all universally experience as human beings. All right, so enough with the context. I love the context. I'm obsessed with the context, but we got to get going. We got to get to getting, and we should chat about the film du jour. So how does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Excellent. You know, I thought long and hard about precisely which film you and I might focus on today. And originally I considered a whole bunch of classics, but, after a lot of thought, I eventually decided that I really wanted to chat about something a lot more contemporary. As someone who runs a semi-chronological heavy metal podcast, I get a little bit stuck in the weeds of, the classics. And I love the classics, but I wanted today to focus on something of the 21st century, and so I settled on Jason Leigh Howden's 2015 horror comedy metal masterpiece, maybe, Deathgasm.
You know that evil heavy metal that your parents hate you listening to? You know those lyrics about hell, demons, and doom? What if I told you it's all real? I know. I was there.
Jesus! It's piss.
That's me, Brody. My friends are losers, so we started a band.
Check it out.
Ricky Daggers. Is he dead? Wouldn't it be crazy if the music had something to do with demons?
Demons.
We're all gonna die.
I translated those pages. Now, people are turning crazy. Like possessed crazy.
What's up?
That was pretty cool, as is, the axe and the...
I'm not even sure I'm in the right tuning. Brother to steal.
So, Patrick, before we get into some of the specific deets, what is your history with this specific movie? Have you seen it prior to watching it for this podcast?
This was my very first watch, and I'm so glad you picked something that I had never seen before because it required a certain level of my attention. So I was like, sweet. Eric did it. I don't know. I've never seen this movie.
Hell yeah. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad that I could introduce you to what I actually think is a pretty fucking cool movie. It's a lot of fun. I actually saw Deathgasm for the first time a couple of years ago. In the early going of the film, I was just like blown away. The first, I want to say the first half of the movie, I just thought it was so funny. It was so like such a loving tribute to like Evil Dead and a million like, sort of brain dead and zombie gore movies. And it was just so fucking metal. And so I loved it. I was of the opinion that as the movie worked its way towards its denouement, it kind of lost a little bit of the steam it had built up, but I had a great time watching it through and through. I was really excited to watch it again and thoroughly enjoyed watching it for this recording. It's a heavy metal horror comedy, so fucking yes, please. Now, what did you think? Just a general overview. What was your overview of your impression watching this film for the first time?
Very similar to yours, where it was just like, first of all, hell yes, it's a heavy metal movie. It's told in modern times, which helps me because I'm really sort of a modern heavy metalhead, even though I've grown up with Metallica and all that good stuff. I really got into the culturally heavy metal when I was around the age of the characters that are in this film. So I really appreciate it and resonate with it with it on that level. It is funny. It is bloody. It is sort of unapologetic and harkens back to maybe some more 80s, early 90s style horror films that kind of don't give a fuck. And I like that. So gory, like intentionally gory and silly and fun. Evil Dead, you mentioned. Dead Alive, very much like I saw the influence of Dead Alive. And then, yeah, I had fun with it. And you're right, it does start to lose steam, where at some point I was just like, I don't even care what's going on. Just get to the next gore thing, because you guys clearly don't care what's going on either. So let's get to the next gore thing. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good time. I think you can forgive it, some of its weaknesses, in a way that you might not otherwise, because it's never boring. It's never unpleasant to watch. It's just, it's a little slipshod now and again, but not, but very fun, very fun. All right, so just a few basic specs for the audience. This film was both written and directed by the aforementioned Jason Leigh Howden, who is a New Zealander who made his bones as a visual effects guy. Now, Patrick, are you aware of his background in the industry?
I was not aware at all.
Yeah, he's a big dude. So he did effects work on these little-known films, like, for instance, the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Avengers.
I've heard of these things.
Yeah.
Maybe I should check them out sometime.
I would advise maybe just give them a look. Maybe they'll strike your fancy. So he's not just some random schmo, obviously. Now, he's only got 8 directing credits listed currently on IMDb, including, I might note, one for the upcoming Deathgasm 2, Goremageddon, which is currently listed as being in pre-production. However, of those credits, the only non-Deathgasm thing I'd heard of was Guns Akimbo, which I haven't ever seen, but I do know the name. Do you know that movie?
Not only do I know that movie, I love that movie.
Ooh.
And when I looked him up for this podcast, I was like, oh shit, he directed Guns Akimbo. That movie is so fucking good, it just fucking rips. It's one of those movies that it's very much like Deathgasm. It just goes for it. It's very unapologetic, it's very kind of hardcore, and it stars Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe himself.
Oh shit.
As the titular character. And he is so far removed from that Harry Potter world and the sweet and nice things. And he just goes crazy in this movie. And I believe Samara Weaving's in it as well, if I'm not mistaken. Fantastic cast, fantastic concept, and much like Deathgasm, fun. Just more refined. Certainly a more refined movie than Deathgasm.
Wow, okay. So I'm going to have to check that one out. Now, Deathgasm stars, among others, Milo Cawthron as Brody, James Blake as Zach, and Kimberly Crossman as Medina. The music, which is not including the bitching metal soundtrack, which we're going to discuss in a few moments, was by Chris Vandegeer and Joost Lageveld. That may be totally mispronounced, but do my best. Also of note, this film was shot over just 20 days on a budget of, would you believe, $150,000.
I don't believe that.
That's fucking amazing, right? I mean, say anything about the slipshod nature. I didn't really notice this as like a quote-unquote low-budget film. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker. I'm not a film, but that's fucking nuts.
I did see it as a low-budget film. It felt like a low-budget film to me, but what didn't feel half-assed at all was the effects. And I'm in the process. I just hired an effects guy for my next short film. That stuff ain't cheap. I have one effect shot, and it's costing me more money than I wanted to spend for the entire short film. So I'm imagining that 144,000 of those dollars probably went to the effects, because the effects in this movie are fun and good.
You'll actually love this. I listened to an interview with Jason Leigh Howden, in sort of preparation for this recording, and one of the fun things I learned was that a lion's share of the effects that they used were actually leftover effects from the Fede Alvarez remake of The Evil Dead.
Wow.
And so they got them not quite for free, but like almost for free. And he said, if you look carefully, you'll notice that some of the effects are just exactly sort of like recreated from stuff that you see in that movie. So
wow.
that I thought was pretty interesting.
Oh my God. And I mean, I just bought the 4K Steelbook of Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead, one of the best gore films of all time.
Oh my God. Possibly the best remake of all time, I think.
maybe the best remake. I think we talked about that on the show. Maybe it's the best remake next to like The Thing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you don't count The Thing, which it is pretty different.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely up there. It's in the conversation.
Oh, it's way in the conversation. So to imagine as a filmmaker getting like boxes full of stuff from that set and going, yeah, you can use this, and you're like, awesome, great, and then they back up a truck, a 5,000-gallon truck full of blood, and go, you can use that too. We don't need that. Just fill up the gas tank when you're done.
That's awesome. It's awesome. Okay, so you are much more expert in this sort of thing than I am. So could you just provide us with a very brief summary of sort of the plot of the film? I hesitate to say spoiler-free because I don't know that one can spoil anything in Deathgasm. But just some of the general outlines of what people can expect if they haven't seen this film yet.
Deathgasm is the story of a young Hesher / metalhead who moves in with his stiff upper lip relatives and accidentally summons hell to earth with his motley crew of metal weirdos. That is what Deathgasm is all about.
Now, they do it through the performance of sort of a heavy metal chant, satanic musical thing that they read off of sheet music, because they're a bunch of dorks secretly, via their band Deathgasm, right?
Correct. Yes. They summon the satanic notes, and it brings hell on earth. And I was like, that's great. Just an easy way in.
So much fun. So good. So fucking good. The movie is just, it is oodles of fun. It is not, let's just be very clear about this, it's not scary. It's not a scary horror movie. It's a horror movie. It's very bloody. It's extremely bloody. It's Gwar concert bloody, I think, more than the Evil Dead remake bloody, I guess is what I would say.
Very much.
But I loved it. I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed it the second time when I kind of knew what the weaknesses were and just kind of went along and watched it. I was like taking notes, and I just like, I don't know, I just stopped taking notes and just was like, this is just fun. I'm just having fun. I love this movie. So, you and I both adore horror movies, but Heavy Metal 101, we're not a film podcast. We are a heavy metal podcast, first and foremost. And fortunately for us, heavy metal is something that this specific film has in spades. So, I actually wanted to borrow a trick from the illustrious Rewind of the Living Dead podcast. And so, as an homage to the amazing work that you guys do over there, I created a category, one single category, for each of us to discuss from this movie. In this case, I thought the most obvious choice was Most Metal Moment. So, Patrick, I'm curious, what was your most metal moment from Deathgasm?
This, without a doubt, is my favorite metal moment from the movie Deathgasm, and that is the music video that Deathgasm poorly attempts to recreate. But here's the thing. They do this music video, and it's very comical and funny. But if you are a real metalhead, you realize it's very much a black metal music video.
It's Immortal. They're parodying Immortal.
It's 100%, 100% an Immortal music video. They go into the woods, they swing sticks around, and they try to look scary, and they fail at it, which is most black metal music videos from that era.
The song is called Intestinal Bungee Jump, which I thought was lots of fun. It's so awesome. If you're going to watch one thing, I don't know for sure. I assume you could just like watch that as a video on YouTube. It's very funny. It's a very funny parody.
So funny. And it's just something for like real metalheads who are way into black metal. Be like, oh, I've seen that video 3 or 4 times on the internet somewhere.
So good. There are a ton of great moments. That was my honorable mention great moment because it is fucking awesome. The one that was nearest and dearest to my own cold black metal heart was when we were very first introduced to the character of Zack, kind of the cool kid, the scary, real, like ferocious, kind of dickish metalhead. And we learned that he was expelled from school previously for stabbing a kid who stepped on his King Diamond record.
Oh, man. I forgot about that. That is a stabbable offense.
I'm a sweet guy, but if you fuck with my King Diamond records, I mean, I might stab you. I might have to. So as we mentioned, this movie is not remotely scary, but it is chock full of gore, metal, and fun takes on just like a whole variety of horror tropes. It also, I cannot not mention that it features possibly the greatest dildo fight in the history of film.
Yeah, baby!
So I don't think anyone should go into this looking to be scared, but I highly recommend this film to all horror fans and all metal fans. What about you? Is this an unqualified recommendation?
This is required viewing for both horror and metal fans, for sure. This is a 100% an intersectional movie for all of us. And I'm sure most metal fans love horror. I'm almost sure of that. But not all horror fans love metal. That's very true. So it's a great place for us all to meet up, shake hands, maybe smack each other with a dildo or two, just to all hang out and be together in some sort of a commonality.
Living life as it's meant to be lived. This is so beautiful. So beautiful.
Wonderful.
Okay, so it's a fun fucking movie. It's a very metal movie. Who could possibly ask for more? Well, we can, because you see, not only is there a ton of metal visual and cultural content in this fine film, but it also has a truly excellent soundtrack covering a vast array of primarily 21st century heavy metal goodness. And we, my friend, are going to talk about it. Now, firstly, you love the film. I love the film. What did you think generally about the soundtrack?
I was blown away because, save one band, I didn't know any of these bands.
Oh.
It was all new to me, which I was like, holy shit, this is really cool to see all these bands with sounds that are very familiar to me, some more than others, but it was all heavy, it was all fun, and I was like, shit, like it almost like it was another renaissance for me. Like the early 2000s, I got into the new wave of American heavy metal, the Shadows Falls, the Kill Switch Engages, and it opened up a whole new world of heavy metal to me. I feel like this soundtrack for Deathgasm opened up yet another new world for me. I was like, here are all these new bands. They're out there, they're touring, they're making music, they're printing t-shirts, and now I get to learn about them at the ripe old age of 43. I'm still learning about new metal bands. Like, that's fantastic for me.
Fuck yeah, it's great. Did you have any particular favorite tracks? Like anything that really stuck out to you on this one?
My favorite track, by chance, once I listened to it and I was like, oh, I fuck with this track, I realized it was the one band I knew, and that was Evil Like a Knife by Midnight. Midnight's bad fucking ass. I fucking love Midnight. And when I heard that song, I was like, oh, this song fucking rips. And I was like, oh, it's Midnight. Well, of course it rips.
Of course. It's like Motorhead and black metal had a baby. It's how are you going to do better than that? Yeah, Midnight Rule, that's a great track. I love this soundtrack. I think it's really, like the movie, it's just so much fun. So for me, I've long been a fan of Skullfist. They are one of my favorite Nawatham bands, and we'll talk about Nawatham in a few moments. And so both the Skullfist tunes on this album, I think are just absolutely great. They're much more in the sort of classic trad metal vein, but they're just very fun. Great soundtrack fodder. Obviously, I can't say enough wonderful things about anything that comes from Emperor's just fucking iconic album, In the Nightshade Eclipse. Material from that album is the only 90s music that shows up on the soundtrack, but of course, it totally rules. It's truly one of the great monuments of early Norwegian black metal.
Black metal!
So, let's get serious. I want to talk a wee bit about each of the bands represented, and particularly about anything interesting that they might have to tell us just more broadly about heavy metal or its various subgenres. I'll note I don't own the physical media that is this soundtrack, and the internet actually offers a few slightly different variants on the track list. They're all pretty similar, but I just kind of threw a dart at the board and chose one that was effective that I had access to for the purposes of this discussion. So your mileage might vary in terms of, the actual order and all that. The version that I chose corresponds to the Spotify playlist that I sent to you, Patrick. And I'll point out, sadly, this isn't on Spotify in its logical original release. So, bummer. Anywho, let's get to getting. Patrick, you ready to get your hands dirty and explore deeply, richly some heavy metal?
Let's do it.
Yes. So, both the soundtrack and the film itself open with the band Axe Slasher, and their short instrumental track, amusingly titled Mark of the Pizzagram. Now, Axe Slasher hail from Denver, Colorado, and they refer to themselves as 1980s slasher thrash, and they have the motto, eat pizza, worship Satan. Now, Patrick, is there anything at all wrong with that?
That is literally how I live my life. Like, those are the two things I do. Eat pizza and worship Satan is pretty much all I do. So yes, Axe Slasher gets the seal of approval.
I figure on the Venn diagram of like people who listen to either of our shows, like they all meet up with that motto, I think, pretty effectively.
I think so too.
So their discography, as of this recording, it consists mostly of a bunch of singles, but also an EP, a split, and a live album, all of which were released between 2012 and 2022. Now, I checked out their 2013 EP, Anthology of Terror Volume 1, which actually opens with the aforementioned Mark of the Pizzagram. I thought it was a lot of sort of retro thrash fun. If you like masked men who tear it up via party/horror thrash, I think this is the band for you. This is fun stuff. It's fun stuff. You dug the tune?
I definitely dug the tune. It was very reminiscent to me of Toxic Holocaust, which I'm a big fan of. I'm a sucker for like good thrash kind of punk metal, party metal, you know, like all that stuff, like Municipal Waste, same deal. Like, I love these like fun, fast, heavy bands, and Axe Slasher very much serves up a hot slice of that.
Yes, they totally do. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Now, next up on the soundtrack was Beast Wars, who actually have not one but two tracks featured, Realms and Damn the Sky. So, are you a Beast Wars fan now?
I am now a Beast Wars fan because I love sludgy riffs. The sludgy stuff gets me every time, so I will continue to visit Beast Wars. There's a touch of few bands in the quality of the singing. I say sludgy, but it's less sleep and more Queens of the Stone Age meets High on Fire meets Mastodon. By the way, I don't hate any of those bands. So the fact that it all kind of coalesces with this sludgy, trudging, trampling sound is like, it's music to my ears.
It's very cool stuff. As you mentioned, they're kind of a mix. They're a bit of stoner metal and a bit of sludge metal together. Now, you mentioned High on Fire. That's definitely one of my very favorite of those sorts of bands. Overall, I'm a little bit agnostic when it comes to stoner metal, but I will point out, like all good things in this entire world, it comes out of 70s classic Black Sabbath. That's kind of the origins, particularly the stuff on the Volume 4 album, that sort of fuzzed out quality. You mentioned Sleep, other bands that are sort of, originators of the sound, Caius, Electric Wizard. These are all sort of early adopters. Now, sludge, which I think both of us just utterly adore. It comes out of the same Melvins-based stew from which grunge emerged, but it's a cross between hardcore and doom, and so it's a little, sludgier than grunge, generally speaking. I guess all of us kind of hate Neurosis now because of unfortunate things that have come out, but they were monumentally important practitioners of that style. Other cool sludge is influenced a bit by swampy southern rock. I think of like Louisiana-based bands, I Hate God, Acid Bath, and then you mentioned Mastodon, the Georgia-based bands like Baroness and Mastodon. Sludge is fucking awesome, and I think Beast Wars fucking awesome. They're great.
Beast Wars, super cool. I can't wait to keep checking them out. And I do want to shout out High on Fire because I just worked on one of their music videos.
Oh shit! Hell yeah!
I forgot I produced one of them.
Hell of a great band. Oh, I guess I should also mention that it is Beast Wars who are so prominently featured in the aforementioned dildo fight we talked about. They provide the underscore, and it's suitably epic, and it's great. It's great. Very, very effective.
Absolute badge of honor for any band to be highlighted in the dildo fight sequence.
Would that I could put that on my own resume. Someday.
Same here.
So next up we get our theme song, which is the fantastic track written for the film and also titled Deathgasm by the New Zealand-based blackened power metal band Bullet Belt. They actually have another tune later on the soundtrack called Black Banshee, which I also think is pretty cool. It's a little long, it kind of drags a little bit in the middle, but Deathgasm, the song, fucking kicks ass, I think. What did you think of the Bullet Belt tracks?
I really dug Bullet Belt for a very specific reason, and that is the vocals remind me very much of an early Angela Gassau, who was the lead singer of Arch Enemy for what is my opinion, their peak years. I think Angelo's like probably my favorite black metal vocalist of all time. She truly sounded demonic. And I think that a little bit of that comes off in the Bullet Belt, where it's just like, you don't even sound human. And that excites me on a primal level.
I also like a little bit like Arch Enemy. There's that trad metal sound underneath Arch Enemy that makes them really sort of accessible despite the demonic vocals and whatnot. And I think you actually get some of that in Bullet Belt as well, where it's like, it kind of sounds musically like power metal, but it's got these horrific shrieking black metal style vocals, which is a really nice juxtaposition. I like it. It made me happy. So next up, two consecutive artists that I was already familiar with from the soundtrack, one of which you mentioned, the killer black and roll of Cleveland, Ohio-based Midnight.
Fun times in Cleveland today, Cleveland!
With Evil Like a Knife. So Midnight, fucking rule. Basically a one-man project, but really, really good music. I can't recommend it enough. And also the Nawatham goodness, as I previously mentioned, of Canada's Skullfist, whose Hour to Live and Bad for Good, both fantastic. So Patrick, black and roll, Nawatham, Midnight, Skullfist, Cleveland. Any of these things getting you going?
Not Cleveland, I can tell you that much. having worked extensively in Cleveland, no offense to the great people of Cleveland, of course.
I did my undergraduate years in the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I can tell you it's a fucking shithole. Sorry, Cleveland audience.
Fun times in Cleveland today, Cleveland!
I was totally new to Nawatham as a title, and black and roll. I didn't know these. I think, here's my personal hot take of this podcast. I think metal has way too many subgenres. I think we need to pare that back to just like maybe 3 or 4. Like there's heavy metal, there's power metal, there's black metal, death metal, and I think after that we're really stretching it. I do, and that's my opinion. As the scholar, please expound on that.
So I have a sort of relatively easy way of thinking extremely broadly about heavy metal in just 3 prongs, which is trad metal in the middle and all of its subgenres, pop metal on one side of that with all of its many subgenres, and extreme metal on the other side with all of its many genres. In a scholarly sense, I do enjoy a good subgenre deep dive, masturbatory session. But at the same time, I do like to sort of keep it reasonably simple in my brain when I can. So I understand what you're saying. So just to unpack these esoteric subgenres a tiny bit, I'll just say, like death and roll before it, black and roll is kind of what it sounds like. It combines elements of black metal alongside charging hard rock good times. Norway's Kvelertak, which is just one of my favorite bands in the entire world, they often get that label. I actually think Midnight is like a perfect example, like a real definitive paragon of black and roll. It's Motorhead and black metal shrieking, and that's those two things together. You get Midnight, you get black and roll. Nawatham stands for New Wave of Traditional Heavy Metal, and it's for all those old dudes and dudettes who can't handle death metal growls or black metal shrieks. I know there's a lot of people like that out there, and therefore they think that all contemporary metal must suck and be totally useless. To them, I think those people need to just pause the episode right now, go to Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube, and just check out the nearest Nawatham playlist. And you can come back and you can thank us profusely, because Nawatham is the music for those people, I think. It's very accessible, it's very fun, and some of those bands are just great. Some of it can be a little derivative for me, looking back too much rather than looking forward, but some of it just rules. Skullfist, I think, are great. Night Demon, another super good Nawatham band. Actually, Elm Street, from later on this very soundtrack. There are Australian Nawatham, yea, Greater Oceania. Patrick, what did you think of the prominently featured Elm Street songs on the Deathgasm soundtrack? That would be Metal is the Way and Heavy Metal Power.
I've got to be really brutally honest here. I'm sure the people from Elm Street are fantastic people. I couldn't get through one song. I did not like the vocals. I really didn't like the vocals. And now my co-host, Damon Martin, for people, the uninitiated, I'm the Friday the 13th guy. Damon Martin is the Elm Street guy. he would claim that this is my inherent bias against Elm Street as a horror franchise. That is incorrect. It is simply a vocals issue. I think with metal, ultimately the vocals have to be the thing that draw you in. So sometimes, I mean, like there can be genres that where it's about the sound and the trudging and all that stuff, and the vocals almost get lost in it. But when you really want to enjoy something, the vocals are going to grab you deeply. I think that's what's going to keep you with a certain band long term. And long term and short term, Elm Street did not have me.
I mean, I think the vocals are an acquired taste. They're not growls, they're not shrieks. They reminded me a little bit, it's less polished and less refined, but Udo from Accept, that sort of almost bullfrog croak kind of quality.
Right.
I actually rather liked the Elm Street songs. They're just as like fun, just very accessible music. It's heavy metal about how awesome heavy metal is, which is like the most trad metal thing you can possibly do. And so I was able to get beyond the vocals. I would agree that they are probably the barrier to Elm Street accessibility. They're not going to be to everybody's taste, I would say.
I could agree with that.
So, moving things along, we get the delightfully named Nunslaughter with their track Looking Into the Abyss. This is actually a particularly gnarly and nasty track off the album. Actually, Nunslaughter, which was a band I wasn't previously familiar with, formed all the way back in 1987. Their page on Encyclopedia Metallium is fun. The band labels their music as quote-unquote devil metal, which I think is pretty sweet. And they have just shit tons of albums listed there. So, I like this track. I'm going to have to go and check out their back catalog at some point. I thought Looking Into the Abyss was great. It's one of the heavier and grittier things on the soundtrack. It's death metal, but with a little bit of that rock and roll sort of Motorhead flavor underneath. What did you think about Nunslaughter?
Nunslaughter, first of all, points for an awesome name. And it's been, on the horror side of things, it's been the year of the nun, right? So we've had The First Omen and Immaculate, which were two fantastic movies. So when I hear Nunslaughter, I'm already wired for it. I'm already wired to enjoy it. I thought Looking Into the Abyss was this great mix of kind of what you were saying, like sludgy, punk, like punk tempo and black metal all together. Like it kind of blended all these nasty little things in one place to make for a really heavy, fucked up song, which I like.
Yeah, it was good. And in the context of the soundtrack, it's like a little heavier than most of the stuff, and that was nice. It's just like a little grittier. This now brings us to the all-important Emperor and Emperor-adjacent portion of the soundtrack. It was a big moment. It's very big. Serious fucking business, as we at Heavy Metal 101 have not yet talked about Emperor. Yikes. Patrick, I advise girding your loins. It's fucking Emperor. It's classic Norwegian black metal. So I have to ask, what is your background or your general thoughts on the proverbial second wave of black metal as represented by the Norwegian bands like Mayhem and Emperor and Immortal, who we mentioned earlier, from the early 90s?
Interestingly enough, my introduction to this second wave came from a movie. So there was this film way back in the day. There was a scene in this one movie called Spun with Jason Schwartzman. Are you familiar with this movie, Spun?
I'm not familiar with that film.
Very weird, kind of like left field movie that he did. And in that movie, there's a scene where somebody's watching a black metal music video. And I was just like, what is that? What kind of metal is that? And it kind of piqued my interest, and that's when I learned about bands like Mayhem, like Celtic Frost, like Satyricon, like Emperor. I started listening to all these bands because of a scene in a movie. And I'm also fascinated, like, with the early church burning era. Have you seen the movie Lords of Chaos?
Oh, sure. I read the book, saw the movie.
Whoa, what a film! Oh, what a film, right? And of course, that's one of the more like legendary. Mayhem's one of the more legendary bands of this genre, and that film, like, I don't care if you've never listened to metal in your life, that's a really intriguing film. It's a really, really good film. So that is my history with it. It's loud and proud because I think it's just such an interesting subgenre that really is dominant. Like it's sort of like we won't go away. We won't be your little subgenre, your subgenre. We are black metal,
for better and worse sometimes.
Yes.
So we're going to deal with black metal real intimately later in this season of HM 101, so I'm not going to get into all of it now. I will note that Emperor was founded by two young Norwegian fellows, Isan on guitar and vocals, and Samoth on drums. The soundtrack features an Isan solo track, Introspection, from his really excellent proggish, kind of blackish 2012 album Eremita. This song, importantly, includes some guest vocals courtesy of Heavy Debbie himself, the great Devin Townsend. Also included on the soundtrack is a song by The Wretched End, which is Samoth's post-Emperor death/black metal project. Song herein is Tyrant of the Mountain from their 2012 album Inroads. I think both of those tracks are just absolutely great. So what did you think? Did you dig on either or both of those post-Emperor projects?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm fascinated. Again, I'm so fascinated with that subgenre that I just sort of take anything in. I am guilty of being someone who's like bad at track names. I know that's like absolutely sacrilege on a metal podcast. Like, you don't know track names? I'm like, I suck at track names. I could never help you with a track name. It burns into my brain and I remember it. That's the best I can do with it.
We're a forgiving and loving people here. I mean, we worship the devil. We love our fellow humans. So it's all good. It's all good. So, most importantly of all, the most important thing, possibly on this entire soundtrack, is the inclusion of The Burning Shadows of Silence and Inno a Satana from the just utterly iconic Emperor 1994 debut album, In the Nightside Eclipse. It's probably my single favorite album from that first swath of Norwegian black metal releases. It's really an indispensable masterpiece. Now is neither the time nor the place for an in-depth discussion, but if you do not know In the Nightside Eclipse, I suggest pausing the podcast, tossing aside, temporarily, the Deathgasm soundtrack, and just go to Blackened Satan's School by listening to that entire album. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. This is a Halloween episode, so let's have ourselves an appropriately evil listening break. And I think all of us should check out track number 3 from In the Nightside Eclipse, / track number 12 from the Deathgasm soundtrack, The Burning Shadows of Silence. Everybody, pause the podcast, click the link in the show notes, and have yourself an evil fucking Halloween, you sick, devil-worshipping bastards. Patrick and I will be here on the other side. Patrick! I feel the fiery blood of Satan himself flowing through my veins. All hail the mighty Emperor! How you feeling?
Oh, I'm feeling deliciously evil. There's just something so evil. Like, this must have scared parents absolutely shitless when their kids would bring this home or they would hear them listening to this in their room. How absolutely terrifying and how apropos, right? We're in spooky season. It feels scary. Like, it just feels like horror, even though, good luck trying to tell what they're actually saying unless you study this stuff like the Torah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're just like, whatever this is, it's fucking scary.
It's funny you mention that because I have a little recitation planned. I got a few lyrics for you. So check this out. Benighted, darker and darker as I walk through the woods, into the silent shadows, as the sky goes from dark to black. Ice-cold whispers burn my skin. From nowhere to the deepest of my soul, they speak unto me. Grievance of sadness, like the gift of sorrow. A moon, a blood-red full moon, lights my black heart's night. Lightning cracks the sky and thunders roll. Through the night, a chaos of storms arise. Purgatory, burning flames catch my eyes. In the shadows so dark, I hear the choirs of evil, a joy in blasphemy beyond my darkest fantasies. The gate is open.
Wow. And you know what? It kind of fucks everything up because it's beautiful poetry.
I know. It's
beautiful poetry, but I mean, evil poetry, but something that would make Edgar Allan Poe blush. He'd be like, wow, that's pretty beautiful.
just everything about it. It's just like, it's all just, I guess saying it's all so good is the wrong thing to say. It's all so evil. But this is the kind of, this is the season where I just crank this shit on my headphones and like to walk through like local cemeteries and stuff. It's like, my inner goth comes through, but it's just so
real good.
All right, I hate to break up the mood because, alas, next we get to a track that is probably my least favorite on the soundtrack. It's cool. It's fine. We get our groove metal on, which is something. This track is 8 Foot Sativa by the New Zealand-based band of the very same name. So what did you think about this track?
With a name like 8 Foot Sativa, I was so ready for a sludge stoner metal band. And then what I got was something completely different, which I would liken more to sort of like hardcore, like New York hardcore. It almost felt a little bit more like that, and I'll be honest, not my favorite subgenre of metal, but I was like, okay, I see what you're up to. But yeah, I was with you. This was one of my lesser tracks on the soundtrack.
I mean, it was good. It's from 2002. It's from an album called Hate Made Me from that year. To me, it sounds very 2002. Like this is like the tail end of nu metal. We still got a lot of nu metal. Pantera was one of the real influences I heard in this as well. It's fine. It's fine. I'll point out, in the movie, there's a prominently located 8 Foot Sativa poster in Brody's bedroom. So apparently Brody from the film was a fan. It's just not my favorite song on the soundtrack. All right, so next we get to probably the very heaviest song on this album, the brutal death metal of the San Diego-based Pathology with their track Alone. Now, Patrick, you said you're not necessarily a big death metal guy, so what did you think of this very guttural, brutal take on death metal?
Well, first of all, shout out to San Diego because that's where I live.
Right, I forgot. I knew this and forgot. So yeah, you should go to a Pathology show. They're probably playing tonight.
They probably don't want to hear my assessment.
Oh, no.
What I liken this to was it's much like well whiskey. I don't ask or care. I just drink it to get drunk. Like, that's kind of how I feel about this. It's like, you know what? I don't care that it's low quality. Just give it to me. It's fine. Like just inject it in my veins. Much like San Diego, it's easy. It's like you just get here and you don't worry about
it. You chill out on the beach, you listen to some Pathology, you just do the thing. Now, actually, of particular note, Pathology were formed by drummer Dave Astor, who was formerly of the very, very good Cattle Decapitation, which is fucking fabulous band. Pathology, to my mind, I kind of agree. It's just like, it's music, it's good. I felt in the context of this soundtrack, it felt very refreshing. It's just like, it's so much more brutal than most of the stuff on here that it worked really nicely here. Pathology also do have a very brutal 2024 release, Unholy Descent. So for those people who just absolutely adored Pathology, go check it out. New album. Very good. I liked it. Okay. So we are getting down to the wire here. We've got a few more bands to discuss, and one of those bands, kind of, sort of, as I'll explain in a second, is Razor Wire. See what I did there? Because we're down to the wire and such. Anyway, just for listeners, it's only one word. It's Razorwyre. Now, this is actually a defunct band, sadly. They were a New Zealand-based trad speed metal band. Unfortunately, they have no longer been playing since 2015. And worse still, at the time of the first writing, when I first drafted the script to this episode and started researching and all of that, they were on Spotify. They were on the playlist I sent to you. However, in just like recent days, they've completely disappeared from Spotify. So I don't know if you got to listen to this band. Did you get to hear either of their tracks?
I ended up listening to Razor Wire on YouTube. That's where I found them. And I'll tell you this, I liked Battle Shark, that track. I made a note to say that Battle Shark, I kind of fuck with that. It was retro, kind of power metal stuff. But the vocalist didn't feel like he had the actual power he wanted for power metal. It was sort of like, if I wanted to be a power metal singer, like sort of like, you're not quite there, buddy. Then I listened to Conjurer, and it sounded like he gained a little bit of it back. So, maybe over time the voice strengthened or something like that. But those were the tracks that I listened to, and I was like, yeah, this is all right.
Yeah, I mean, apparently it wasn't all right enough that they still exist, so you're not in the minority opinion, it looks like. But I will say both of the tracks from the soundtrack are from the band's debut, which is their only album to date, which is called Another Dimension from 2012. So it is still on YouTube, as you correctly ascertained. You can also find it on Bandcamp. I think they're worth a look. I mean, I have a very mixed relationship with power metal in general. And I would almost say in some respects, the fact that the singer didn't have like quite that like epic power metal sound, like it's kind of a selling point for me. Like that It can be a little overwrought. I mean, unless you're Bruce Dickinson, it's a lot, the like faux operatic quality of a lot of power metal. So I liked it. I thought it was fun. It's well featured in the movie. This is the music that the female lead character finds her like inner metalhead to Razor Wire's work. So yeah, it's fun. It's kind of Nawafami and retro and all that. So I liked it. Check it out if you're interested in that sort of thing. Okay. Now we're getting down to it. We've got one band before our big finish. We're just going to take a very slightly closer look at Skullfist and get our Nuwatham just fully engaged. Before that, however, we can't possibly skip Lair of the Minotaur and their just delightful sing-along song, Let's Kill These Motherfuckers. Patrick, how fun was this?
This is fantastic. Lair of the Minotaur was another band that I was familiar with. I kind of misspoke earlier saying I only known one band. I knew Lair of the Minotaur as well, and I knew Emperor, of course. This is a great kind of hard-charging, stomp around the pit, shotgun beers type of track. It's just fucking fun.
Absolutely. From Chicago, Lair of the Minotaur. And look, it is pretty much impossible to go wrong when the lyrics of your chorus are, we fucked them all, let's fuck them all again. Let's kill these motherfuckers. I have no complaints.
No notes. No notes. Simple storytelling, people. Like, that is the key to any great horror film, and it's a key to a great metal track as well.
I completely concur. Absolutely. So look, it's a super fun soundtrack. You got a very small bit of classic 90s black metal and just like a whole bunch of early 21st century goodness. Metal in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You have a fun movie, fun soundtrack. Speaking of which, before we finish up on Deathgasm-related discussion, I thought it might be worth each of us taking just a brief moment, to suggest a personal favorite heavy metal film soundtrack, aside from Deathgasm, that the listeners might want to investigate. Before those days when everything was available at the touch of an app, movie soundtracks were a pretty great way to check out just like a variety of bands all in one swath. So Patrick, do you have any favorite heavy metal soundtracks you might like to share?
Now, this really would have been a question for my co-host Damon Martin, who is obsessed with movie soundtracks. But I do have one, and it's in fact one that he and I both have in common, that I absolutely adore, and this might be controversial. The Freddy vs. Jason soundtrack is an absolute, 2000s metal dream.
Wow. Fascinating. So, okay, I'm going to get some inside baseball here. I have very intentionally I've listened to your entire, the Rewind of the Living Dead. You guys did a Nightmare on Elm Street sort of retrospective of many episodes. You kind of do that each season with a franchise, which is awesome. The Alien one going on right now has been a delight. So I have listened to every single episode of that except for Freddy vs. Jason, because I have seen and literally hated Freddy vs. Jason, like way back in the day, like when it came out. And you guys, throughout that entire investigation, were constantly talking up how great Freddy vs. Jason is. So I'm like, all right, obviously I have to check this movie out again. It's been forever since I saw it. Maybe I just, whatever. Well, first time watching, a long time ago. So I have not managed to find the time or the streaming to rewatch it. And so I'm very much looking forward to rewatching Freddy vs. Jason and finally checking out that episode, because I know how much you guys love it. And apparently the soundtrack as well.
It's a huge soundtrack, by the way. 18 tracks with the likes of bands like Il Nino. How 2000s is that? Mushroom Head, nice. Chimera, Stone Sour, Lamb of God was on there, Nothing Face, Hatebreed, Killswitch Engage, which I really loved those guys. The Howard Jones era was like my favorite era of Killswitch. Fun band. Sepultura, In Flames, Seven Dust, which I really dig. Slipknot had a track on there. I mean, it was one of these things that just took you through that 1999 to 2005 era of metal. It's this wonderful snapshot, and boy did I eat it up at the time. I wore that soundtrack out.
Nice. All right, so I'm going to clearly, again, it's been on my list for a while because of you guys. I got to rewatch the movie, and clearly I have to investigate the soundtrack. That does sound like a really fun portrait of a very specific time in heavy metal.
Very specific time.
So I'm actually going to do very much the same thing with probably a similarly time-specific and controversial choice. So a little earlier. A lot earlier, actually. So I'm going to show off a bit of the glammier side of my personal aesthetic, the sort of the earliest metal that I was steeped in. There's not that many metal, so, I was kind of going through the list and thinking about great films with important soundtracks. One of the ones, Decline of the Western Civilization Part 2, one of the more, monumentally important movies to me, great soundtrack. I was thinking of all these things, but, honestly, the metal soundtrack that meant the very most to me was the soundtrack to the hugely disappointing 1989 Wes Craven film, Shocker.
Nice.
The movie sucked. I saw it in the theater and was so freaking disappointed. But the soundtrack featured, among others, a supergroup called the Dudes of Wrath, which consisted of Paul Stanley of Kiss and Desmond Child, the great songwriter for all the glam metal bands, singing, Vivian Campbell, formerly of Dio, and then of Whitesnake, and now of Def Leppard on guitar, Rudy Sarzo, Ozzy Osbourne's bassist at the time, and Tommy Lee on drums. Wow. Incredible stuff. Also on the soundtrack, Iggy Pop, Megadeth, Dangerous Toys, and a pretty obscure German sort of pop metal band called Bonfire, who perform a excellent, really obscure Kiss song that was never released on any Kiss albums called Sword and Stone, which is it's very period, but it's just all extremely near and dear to my heart. So I would say that anyone listening can skip the film if you haven't seen it, but I just listened to it yesterday while I was jogging just to remind myself. It's only available, I could only find it on YouTube, sadly. I think I have a cassette somewhere, but I don't have a cassette player. But so Patrick, do you know Shocker and or its accompanying soundtrack?
I know the movie very well. I did not know about the soundtrack, and I will immediately go to YouTube after this and go check it out. Dudes of Wrath. When you laid out who's in Dudes of Wrath, that completely tracks. Of course they would name themselves Dudes of Wrath.
I will also warn you that as a guest appearance on amongst the Dudes of Wrath, you get to hear Alice Cooper rap.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have to stop the podcast now because I have to listen to that.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. I think we'll just wrap it. We're done.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, good stuff. It's really fun. Okay. Time for the big finish. Aside from Emperor, who, as I mentioned, we're going to explore in some detail on a future black metal episode, I personally think the band herein that most merits just a very slightly more detailed look is the aforementioned Skullfist, who are quite possibly my favorite Nawatham band, and whose 2 songs on the soundtrack, they're just so good. They're really good. So Patrick, shall we talk about some motherfucking Skullfist?
Please, let's talk about Skullfist.
Yes. So a little bit of context about the broader movement of which they are but a small part. Nawatham is obviously a play on the classic Nawabum, mouthful that is, or new wave of British heavy metal from the early 1980s. The Nawatham, by contrast, is a 21st century movement of cool kids who are just playing a new take on that very straight-ahead, traditional style of heavy metal. It's so much fun. So much fun. Cornerstones of the scene include the Swedish band Enforcer, the American band Night Demon, a shockingly large number of bands from our neighbor to the north, Canada. Not sure why that is, but that includes Skullfist. Skullfist first came together in 2006 in Toronto. They're a power trio, featuring a current lineup chock full of dudes with really excellent trad metal stage names, including Zack Slaughter, Casey Slade, and JJ Tartaglia. Patrick, I'm curious, what would your kick-ass metal stage name be?
Now, help me out with this, because I'm like, did I come up with this, or does it exist somewhere? And if anyone's going to know, it's going to be Eric. I thought, my stage name would be Gorebringer.
I'm going to tell you, you've stumped me. I don't think there are any other Gorebringers out there.
I was just making sure it wasn't some Florida black metal band's lead singer's name. I was like, that feels like it exists, but I'm going with Gorebringer.
Gorebringer, if you're listening now, please shoot us an email and let us know that Patrick has tried to steal your nom de plume.
You've got mail.
Oh, wait, here's the email right now. Gorebringer@hotmail.com. That is my name. Please cease and desist.
I love that. Gorebringer is great. It's very on brand, and it should be it probably is somebody's name, and we're just not familiar with the poor schmo. But I like it. I like it a lot.
I do too.
So for me, back in the day, I used to record songs with a semi-fictional glam metal band that was called Fux, spelled F-U-X, which, I should point out, is like the German Baroque contrapuntalist of the same name, for those who are not familiar with such things. My name in that project was Ignatius Martini Fux, a.k.a. I am Fux. So I think I'd stick with that one. It's an oldie but a goodie.
That's fantastic. And by the way, fucks is exactly how my 7 and 10-year-old spell that word when they want to get away with saying a bad word. That's exactly how they spell it.
Nice. Well, they're being artistic. It ties into 18th century Germanic musical counterpoint. So tell them I approve.
Definitely where they got that from. I'm sure of it.
Good for them. So anyhow, Skullfist have released 2 EPs and 4 full-length albums chock full of modern trad metal goodness to date. The 2 songs featured on the soundtrack to Deathgasm, Hour to Live, and Bad for Good, are actually both off of their 2014 album, Chasing the Dream, which I would highly recommend to any lover of trad metal, old or new. And this, I think, calls for just one final official listening break. Let's us check out the very last track on this soundtrack, Skullfist's anthemic Bad for Good. Listeners, one more time, pause the podcast, click the link, and Patrick and I will be back with our spooky parting thoughts on the other side. Oh my freaking goodness. I cannot hardly think of a better way to prep for the Halloween season than watching a heavy metal horror movie and then rocking out to a horror metal soundtrack. Patrick, did you have as much fun with this as I did?
I had a blast with it. Like I said, all this stuff was new to me, save a few bands. And it was just like, cool, there's new music for me to enjoy in the heavy metal genre. Man, I'm always excited about that. You get to a certain age and you think you're done finding new music. And then something glorious like this comes around. I'm like, oh my God, there's actually hundreds of albums that I now need to consume.
It just keeps on growing and growing. It's a beautiful thing. It gives us something to look forward to every single day. It's so nice. So nice.
I think that horror and metal both are these genres that will not die. Their communities live on generationally. You go to a horror film, you see people from 5 to 905, and the same goes for metal shows too. It's just like, we love this stuff. We will never give it up. We will always be there for it.
So very agree. Absolutely and totally agree. So I have to ask, it being the Halloween season and all, have you got any exciting plans for this upcoming Halloween?
I'm trying desperately to put together a long legs costume this year.
Nice.
I'm just so very obsessed with Nicolas Cage's take. And to me, and I think it's apropos to this podcast, he's a rocker, which I don't want to, I'm not going to spoil any of the rest of the movie for people who haven't seen it, but Nicolas Cage's character, very much steeped in rock and roll. And so I'm just like, hell fucking yeah, I'm going to try to fuck with that this Halloween.
He even sings at some point, which hopefully is not a spoiler.
He does sing at some point.
I love that. It's fantastic. So on my end, my girls have finally reached that age where their like intense passion for trick-or-treating is starting to fade. So we're kind of recalibrating how we celebrate Halloween. So this year, my plan, God help me, is to escort them and a whole bunch of their friends to our local Spooky Woods attraction in order to celebrate the season.
That's a fantastic... Now, have you ever taken them to like haunted houses, haunted trails before?
I have to admit, I have not. They were always a little leery. My wife doesn't like stuff like that. Like, she is particularly not into like haunted houses, like freak her out to no end. So this would be, I have watched a lot of horror movies, like entry-level horror movies with my girls, but this would be our first haunted attraction.
As a fellow father with sons who are way braver than they actually are, and I've taken them to things like this, I'm going to advise one thing. Earplugs. the shrieking of 7th grade girls
Yep.
and their friends, that is going to bleed your ears more than any Manowar concert you've ever been to. I promise you.
All right. This is very good advice, and I'm pleased to say that I have a pair of earplugs on my keychain that I keep with me at all times. So I'm going to be ready to go. I'm going to be just like all ready to go.
You're going to need them. You are going to need them, pal.
All right, so that just about does it for us. Now, Patrick, let me say again how incredibly appreciative I am of your joining me for the show, talking about all of this just delightful stuff. Could you just tell the nice people how they might go about finding you and your magnificent podcast, your website, and like all of the amazing stuff that you do?
You can find pretty much everything for Rewind of the Living Dead at rewindofthelivingdead.com. Our podcast is everywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube. We are everywhere you listen to podcasts, so you can find us there. You can find me at Director Patrick on pretty much all social media except for Facebook, because I'm not on Facebook. And I believe I might be Patrick of the Living Dead on TikTok, but I think if you search Director Patrick, you might still find me. As far as Damon Martin, he is at Damon Martin everywhere that social media exists. And you can search Rewind of the Living Dead on Instagram. We have a huge following. It's a very interactive place. So if you come to our Instagram, search Rewind of the Living Dead, find us. You'll see mine and Damon's zombified face on the cover. And we're there posting little snippets of news, little snippets of the podcast, and we interact with all of our fans. We love it. We're so grateful that people come around and listen to us all the time.
And I will definitely put some of these links just easily accessible in this episode's show notes, so check those out. And like, seriously, I am not just saying it. Please, everybody listening, do check out Rewind of the Living Dead, all of Patrick and Damon's social media. Everything they do is fantastic. I love it. I am legitimately a huge fan, and I endorse it. I personally endorse it. Very strongly.
We thank you for your endorsement.
Absolutely. And a friendly reminder to everyone listening, you can also always reach John and I here at HM101 via email, social media, or voicemail at any time. And that we always love to hear from each and every one of you. Rate us, review us, and then please do something terribly spooky in honor of the great and wondrous Halloween season. Thanks again, Patrick. Thanks to all of you for listening. You will all be missed until we meet again, but in the immortal words of Pinhead, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.